Let me write this story for you now. I need to stop for a moment before I tell you any of this. For 34 years, I worked as a forensic accountant for the federal government. My job was to follow the money, to find the numbers that didn't add up, to sit across the table from people who had stolen millions and watch them lie to my face while I already held every piece of evidence I needed. I was good at it. I was very good at it. And when I finally retired at 62, my supervisor told me I had the sharpest eye for financial deception he had ever seen in 3 decades of running that department. So, you would think I would have seen it coming. You would think that a man who spent his entire career catching people who hid money, who falsified records, who built entire second lives funded by stolen funds, you would think that man would notice when the same thing was happening inside his own home, inside his own marriage, inside the accounts he had spent 40 years building with the woman he had loved since she was 26 years old. You would think that. I didn't see any of it. My wife and I had been married for 37 years when this began. We met in Cincinnati in the late 80s, introduced by a mutual friend at a cookout on a Sunday afternoon in July. She was a school teacher then. 4th grade. She had this way of explaining things slowly and clearly. Like every person she talked to deserved to fully understand what she was saying. I fell in love with that quality before I fell in love with anything else about her. We married 2 years later. We had 2 sons. We built a life in a suburb outside of Columbus that was quiet and decent and exactly what we had planned it to be. When I retired, we had the house paid off. We had a retirement account with just over $900,000 in it. We had a joint savings account, a brokerage account in both our names, and a secondary account she managed for household expenses that I added to every month like clockwork. I trusted her completely with all of it. She had handled the day-to-day finances for most of our marriage because I was often buried in work, and she was organized and careful, and I had never once had a reason to question anything she did. That was the foundation. That was what 37 years looked like from where I was standing. Now, let me tell you what it actually looked like from where the truth was standing. It started with a phone call I was never supposed to receive. I was in the garage in October, about 14 months after I retired, doing what I spent a lot of afternoons doing, sorting through boxes of old case files I had brought home over the years, deciding what to shred and what to keep. My cell phone rang. The number was local, but I didn't recognize it. I almost let it go to voicemail. The man on the other end of the line asked if he was speaking to my wife's husband. I told him yes. He was quiet for a second, and then he said he was sorry to bother me, but that he had found my number through a mutual contact, and he felt I had a right to know something. He said his name was Patrick. He said he was a commercial real estate broker. He said my wife had come to him 8 months earlier with a proposal to invest in a property development project, a mixed-use building being constructed in a suburb north of Columbus. He said she had presented herself as an independent investor with full authority over the funds she was bringing to the table. He said she had transferred $260,000 into the project escrow account over a period of 6 months. I sat down on an overturned storage bin, and I didn't say anything for probably 15 seconds. He kept talking. He said the project had stalled. The developer had hit legal trouble, and the whole thing was under review. He had been trying to reach my wife about the status of the funds. She had stopped returning his calls 3 weeks earlier. He said he was not calling to cause problems. He said he genuinely did not know if I was aware of any of this, but that given the amount of money involved, he thought someone in my family should know what was happening. I thanked him. I wrote his name and number down on the back of a receipt from my shirt pocket. I sat in that garage for a long time after I hung up. Then I went inside and I opened my laptop and I logged into our joint savings account. The balance was $41,000. When I had last checked it, and I will admit it had been several months because I trusted her. I trusted her completely. The balance had been close to $230,000. I didn't say anything to my wife that evening. I made dinner. I asked about her day. I watched her talk about a neighbor's new dog and a book she was reading. And I sat across the table from her, and I used every skill I had spent 34 years developing, and I kept my face completely still. The next morning, When she left for her weekly volunteer shift at the library, I sat at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and I began doing what I had always done for a living. I followed the money. I went through every account I could access. The joint savings was nearly drained. The household expense account had been used to make regular transfers I had never authorized or discussed. The brokerage account had been liquidated. She had sold off positions over the course of 18 months and moved the cash in increments that were careful, deliberate, and clearly designed not to trigger any single large withdrawal that might catch my attention. The total she had moved without my knowledge was somewhere between $400,000 and $450,000. I sat there for 3 hours and I did not make a single sound. I called my older son that afternoon. He is 33 and works in IT security in Denver. I told him I needed his help finding some information and that I needed him to be discreet. I didn't tell him why. Not yet. He helped me pull some records I wasn't sure how to access on my own. Within 2 days, between the two of us, we had a clear picture of where a significant portion of the money had gone. It had gone into that real estate project, as Patrick had described. But that was not all of it. There was a second stream. Smaller transfers, more irregular, spread over nearly 2 years. They traced back to a private account in her name, only one I had never known existed, and from there, some of it had gone to cash withdrawals and some of it had gone to expenses I could not immediately identify. Hotel stays in cities we had never visited together. Restaurant charges in neighborhoods across town on evenings she had told me she was visiting her sister. I hired a private investigator 11 days after that phone call in the garage. I want to be clear about why. I wasn't looking for pain. I already had more than enough of that. I was looking for documentation. I was looking for the complete picture, because I had spent my career knowing that you do not confront until you have everything, and you do not walk into a conversation you cannot finish. The investigator's name was Dennis. He was a former sheriff's deputy from Delaware County, methodical and quiet. And he gave me his first report after 9 days of surveillance. My wife was meeting regularly with a man I will call her companion. He was 51 years old. He ran a small residential construction company. They met for lunch. They met at a hotel in a suburb west of the city on Tuesday afternoons, when she was supposedly at a yoga class she had never actually enrolled in. They had been seeing each other, based on what Dennis could piece together from her phone and financial records and what he observed directly, for somewhere between 18 months and 2 years. I looked at the photographs in Dennis's file for a long time. Then I closed the folder and I asked Dennis one more thing. I asked him to find out everything he could about this man's business, his finances, his company structure, any liens, any judgments, any legal filings. Dennis came back to me 5 days later. The construction company had 2 outstanding civil suits from former clients. There was a mechanic's lien on a property in Westerville. The business had been operating at a loss for at least 3 years, based on publicly available filings. And this is the part that made me set the report down on my kitchen table and stare at the wall for a long time. One of his previous long-term relationships, a woman from Worthington he had been with for nearly 3 years, had filed a civil complaint against him 2 years earlier, alleging that he had manipulated her into transferring money to his company under false pretenses. The case had been settled out of court. My wife had not been having an affair. My wife had been the target of a very deliberate, very patient financial predator. And somewhere along the way, she had also made choices that I will never fully understand. I want to be honest about this part because I think it matters. I am 64 years old. I have seen a great deal of human behavior in my professional life. I understand that the line between victim and willing participant is not always a clean one. There were things my wife did that no one made her do. She opened that private account herself. She sold those brokerage positions herself. She chose not to tell me about any of it. Whatever hold this man had over her, whatever story he told her about love or opportunity or a future she decided she wanted, she made decisions. And those decisions had consequences. I met with a divorce attorney before I said a single word to my wife. I met with her twice, actually. I wanted to understand exactly where I stood legally before I changed anything about my behavior or my access to what remained of our assets. My attorney was sharp and thorough, and she helped me take several protective steps in the 2 weeks before I was ready to have the conversation. I finally sat down with my wife on a Tuesday evening in December. Our younger son was home that week for a visit, and I had asked him to give us some time alone after dinner. I told him we needed to discuss some financial matters. He looked at me with an expression that told me he already sensed something was wrong. I waited until the house was quiet. I set Dennis's report on the table. I set the account records next to it. I set the photographs on top. My wife looked at them for a long moment without saying anything. I told her I knew about the accounts. I told her I knew about the real estate project and Patrick and the transfers. I told her I knew about the hotel on Tuesday afternoons. I told her I knew about the lawsuit filed against the man she had been seeing by a woman in Worthington. I told her all of it, calmly, the same way I would have presented findings in a professional briefing, because that was the only way I trusted myself to get through it without my voice breaking. She started to cry. She told me it wasn't what I thought. She told me she had been unhappy for a long time. She told me the man had promised her a future. She told me she had believed the investment was real and that she had planned to replace the money before I ever noticed. She said she was going to tell me. She said she had been trying to find the right time. I listened to all of it. Then I told her I had already spoken to an attorney. I told her the divorce filing would be completed by the end of the month. I told her I had already secured what remained of our assets and that my attorney had advised me on how we would proceed with the property and the retirement account. I told her that if she wanted to pursue legal action against the man for the money he had taken from her, I would not stand in her way. But that was her business to manage, not mine. I told her one more thing. I told her that for 37 years, I had been faithful to her and honest with her and present for her and our sons, and that I was going to leave that record intact by walking away from this marriage with my head up rather than with bitterness. Then I got up, picked up Dennis's folder, and went to the room at the end of the hall where I had been sleeping for the past 3 weeks. My older son called me from Denver the next morning. He had called his brother the night before. He was angry in a way I had not heard from him in years. A focused, quiet anger that reminded me of myself at his age. He told me he was behind me in whatever I decided to do. His brother said the same thing when he came to find me in the kitchen that morning, sat down across from me, and didn't say much, just put his hand on my forearm for a moment. That mattered more than I know how to express. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. The settlement was not easy. There were arguments through our attorneys about the retirement account, about the house, about what exactly constituted marital waste given what she had transferred out. My attorney was excellent, and we made a strong case. I will not share the exact figures, but I will say that I came out of it with enough to live with dignity and to know that the future I had built was not entirely gone. The man she had been involved with, I made one phone call. I called Patrick, the real estate broker who had first contacted me in the garage that October afternoon. I told him exactly what I had found through my own investigation about this man's history, the lawsuit, the previous victim, the pattern. I told him that if he and any of the other investors in the stalled project wanted to pursue a coordinated civil action, the documentation I had gathered through my PI might be useful to them. Patrick thanked me and told me he would be in touch with his attorney. I don't know what came of it. That chapter was not mine to finish. About 4 months after the divorce was final, I got a text message from my wife. She said she was struggling. She said things had not worked out the way she had expected. She said she missed our life. She asked if we could talk. I read it twice. I thought about what 37 years felt like when it was good, which it was, for a long time, which is the part that makes all of this hurt in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. Then I put my phone back in my pocket and I went back to what I was doing. Some doors, once you close them with your whole self, you don't open again. Not because you're still angry, not because you want someone to suffer, but because you know the way you know, when a set of numbers has been altered, that there is no version of going back that leads anywhere real. I am 64 years old. I have my health. I have 2 sons who call me every week. I have a small house now, quieter than the one I left, and I have mornings that are entirely my own. I am not going to tell you I am fully healed because I think that would be dishonest. And if there is one thing 34 years in forensic accounting taught me, it is that dishonesty always costs more than whatever it was trying to protect. But I am standing, and I am standing on ground that is entirely mine. If you are watching this, and something in what I said feels familiar to you, the trust you gave completely, the numbers that somehow never quite added up, the feeling that the person across the breakfast table has become a stranger while wearing the same face. I want you to hear this. Document everything before you say a single word. Protect yourself first, and know that there is a life on the other side of it that belongs to you. It may not be the life you planned, but it can still be yours.